The first time my brother saw me in my army uniform, he laughed. The last time he saw me in it, he did not speak at all. I still remember the sound of my boots on the courthouse steps that morning, sharp and steady against the cold stone, like each step had a purpose older than anger and stronger than fear. The flag above the building was moving in the wind, and my dress uniform felt tighter than I remembered. Not because it had shrunk, but because I had changed. I stood there for 1 second with my hand on the brass button of my jacket and looked at my reflection in the dark courthouse glass. Sergeant Emma Collins. That name used to mean something to me. It meant discipline. It meant long nights, hard choices, miles of road, and the kind of silence you only learn when you've seen too much. It meant I could carry more than people thought. It meant I could keep moving even when my heart felt like it was made of broken glass. That morning, though, my name meant something else. It meant I had come home for the last time. Inside that courthouse, my mother was already seated in the front row, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. My brother, Mason, sat beside her in a shiny gray suit he could barely afford, acting like he owned the room. His wife, Tessa, sat next to him with her chin lifted and her mouth turned down like everything about this place offended her. They all turned when I walked in. Mason's eyes narrowed immediately. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "look who finally decided to make a show of it." I did not answer. I kept walking. Tessa's gaze went over my ribbons, my nameplate, the polished brass, the flag patch, and then came back to my face. She smiled the way some people smile when they think they have already won. "Couldn't just wear black like everyone else?" she asked softly enough for the people around us to hear. My mother did not say anything at first. She just looked at me, and I saw it in her face before she even opened her mouth. Embarrassment. Not pride, not gratitude, embarrassment. This was the same woman I had sent part of every paycheck to for almost 9 years. This was the same woman who had cried on the phone when she said Mason needed help with rent, then with the truck payment, then with the shop, then with the hospital bills after Dad got sick. This was the same woman who had told me once, in the flat voice of someone who had already decided what they wanted to believe, "You chose that life, Emma. You can't expect us to stop living ours just because you're out there playing soldier." I stood at the back of the courtroom and looked at my family. My family. The word felt almost funny in my mouth. The clerk called the hearing to order. The judge had not arrived yet. People were still settling. I could hear the low murmur of voices, the scrape of chairs, the rustle of papers. Across the room sat Miss Harlan, the estate attorney my father had hired before he died. He lifted his eyes to me for 1 second and gave the smallest nod. That was when Mason finally got up and came toward me. He stopped just short of my face and looked me over with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You really came dressed like that," he said. "This is a family matter, not a parade." I looked at him and thought, not for the first time, that he had my father's mouth and none of his courage. "I wore it because Dad asked me to," I said. Mason gave a short laugh. "Dad asked you to wear that old thing. He asked me one last time." That made him pause. Good. Because if there was one thing my brother had always hated, it was being left out of a room where the truth mattered. The thing nobody in that courthouse knew yet was that I had not come there to beg for a place at the table. I had come to make sure the table was pulled apart board by board. 3 weeks earlier, I had been standing in the same driveway where I used to ride my bike as a kid, staring at the house I grew up in. It was a plain 2-story home on the edge of a small town in Ohio, with chipped white paint, a sagging front porch, and a maple tree out front that dropped leaves every fall onto the same cracked concrete walkway. It was not fancy. We were never fancy. But the house had always been ours, or at least, that was what I used to think. Dad had been gone for 6 months by then. He had died on a rainy Tuesday in March, and by the weekend my mother had already started talking about next steps, which is the sort of phrase people use when they are trying not to say the word "sell the house." I had flown in from Colorado with 2 bags, 1 carry-on, and my dress uniform folded carefully in a garment bag. I had not worn it in nearly a year. My knee still ached from an injury I picked up while unloading equipment on base, but I was used to pain. Pain was easy. Betrayal was harder. Mom met me at the door without hugging me. "You're here," she said. like I had arrived late to an appointment she did not really want me at. I told you I'd come. Her eyes moved to the garment bag over my shoulder. You brought that? Yes. She sighed. Emma, this is a funeral, not some ceremony. It's Dad's funeral. She pressed her lips together, the way she always did when she was about to tell me I was making things difficult. You know Mason is handling the arrangements, she said. He and Tessa have been helping me with everything. That sentence should have meant nothing. It meant everything. Because while I had been overseas for years, and then stationed at different bases across the country, I had sent money home regularly. Not once or twice. Regularly. I paid for repairs after the storm tore part of the roof off. I paid the back taxes one winter when Mom said they were temporary. I paid for Dad's medication after the surgery. I paid Mason's community college tuition when he said he just needed one semester to get on his feet. And still, every time I called, every time I asked what was going on at home, I heard the same thing. Don't worry about it, Emma. We've got it handled, Emma. You're so far away, Emma. You wouldn't understand, Emma. What I understood was that my family had gotten very comfortable spending my money while pretending my life was a hobby. At the funeral, Mason stood up in front of everybody and gave a speech that was polished enough to fool strangers. He talked about Dad's hard work. He talked about family values. He talked about sacrifice. I sat in the second row in my uniform and watched his hands tremble only once. When he said Dad had always believed in second chances, I nearly laughed at that. Dad had believed in second chances. He had not believed in easy excuses. After the service, when everyone was back at the house, Mason cornered me in the kitchen while the casseroles and flowers and murmuring neighbors filled the rest of the rooms. We need to talk, he said. I crossed my arms. About what? He glanced toward the living room where Mom was accepting condolences with the same tired expression she had worn for the last 10 years. About the house. My stomach tightened. What about it? He lowered his voice like he was doing me a favor. This place is too much for Mom to keep up with. There are bills, repairs, taxes. Dad's medical stuff left a mess. Dad was covered. Mason gave me a look. Not all of it. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means I've got a buyer interested. A cold feeling slid through me. You what? A developer. Good money. More than enough to clear the debt and set Mom up somewhere smaller. We are not selling this house. His face hardened. You don't get to decide that. You haven't lived here in years. I paid for this house. He gave a short, dismissive smile. That's not how it works. I was still trying to process what he had said when Tessa appeared in the doorway, one hand on her hip, her expression too calm for someone who was about to drop a bomb. Actually, she said, Mason already talked to the realtor. The closing could happen fast if everyone signs. Everyone? I repeated. She tilted her head. Your mother said she'd sign. I turned to the living room and found Mom looking away. That was the moment I realized something was wrong in a way that went deeper than greed. Mom knew. She had already agreed to this. What debt? I asked quietly. No one answered. Mason folded his arms. There's no point pretending. Dad should have left better paperwork. This is just reality. I looked at him, and my voice came out low and flat. You said you had a buyer before Dad was even buried. That's not fair. Fair? My laugh was sharp enough to cut. You want to talk about fair after I spent 8 years sending money home while you played businessman with my savings? His eyes flicked briefly to the floor, then back up. Nobody forced you to join the army. There it was. The line I had heard in different forms for years. Nobody forced you. You chose this. You left. You didn't have to. People say those things when they want your sacrifice without your voice. I stepped past him and walked outside before I said something I could not take back. That night I stayed in my old room, the one with the pale blue walls I had painted myself when I was 16. The bed was made neatly, but only because Mom had folded the comforter over the mattress like she was staging a guest room. None of my things were there. No medals, no letters, no old books. Just a childhood room that had been stripped of everything that proved I ever lived there. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened the drawer in the nightstand out of habit, half expecting to find the old flashlight I used to hide there as a kid. Instead, I found an envelope. My name was written on the front in Dad's uneven handwriting. For a second, I could not breathe. My hands shook as I opened it. Emma, it said, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And they have already started talking too much. Do not let Mason bully you into anything. Do not sign anything without a lawyer. And wear your uniform one last time. They need to see you as you are before they understand who they've been talking to. There was more. A phone number, a name, a date, and a line at the bottom that made my throat close up. I am sorry I did not protect you better. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the paper. Dad had known. He had known. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to leave me a warning. Enough to tell me to wear my uniform. Enough to know that the family I came home to was not the same family I had left. The next morning, I called the number in the note. The lawyer's name was Harlan, and his office was downtown above a bakery. He did not waste time with sympathy. He asked me to bring every document I had related to the house, the money transfers, and my father's estate. When I walked into his office, he already had a thick folder waiting. Your father came to see me 6 months before he passed, he said. Then again 2 months later. He suspected something. Suspected what? Harlan opened the folder and slid a paper across the desk. This. It was a copy of a home equity loan application. My name was on it. Or rather, my name was supposed to be on it. I knew I had never signed that document. I looked up slowly. That's a forgery. Yes, he said. And not a very good one. The room felt smaller all of a sudden. Who submitted it? He did not answer immediately. Then he tapped the paper with one finger. Your brother. I stared at him. Harlan leaned back in his chair. The loan was taken out against the house while your father was in and out of treatment. The money was transferred into a business account tied to Mason's landscaping company. Mason's business. The one he always claimed was finally taking off. My chest went tight. How much? Harlan's face was grim. $82,000. I actually laughed then, but it came out broken. 82,000, I repeated. And your father found out too late to reverse the damage. He was furious. He wanted to go to the police then, but he was weak. And he was worried about your mother. What did Mom know? Harlan looked at me carefully. Enough. That answer told me everything. Enough. The most dangerous word in the English language when it comes from someone who wants to keep a family from falling apart. I leaned forward. Did Dad leave me anything? Harlan hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer would change everything. Yes, he said. He did. He opened the folder again and turned to a page marked with a sticky note. Your father transferred the house into a trust 3 weeks before he died. He named you as the primary beneficiary and trustee. I blinked at him. He went on. That means Mason had no legal authority to sell the property. He also cannot force a sale without your approval. The room went absolutely still. Then he reached into the folder one more time and pulled out a second envelope. This was sealed in his desk, he said. He told me to give it to you only if you came in person. I took it with both hands. Inside was another letter, folded once, heavy with Dad's handwriting. Emma, it said, if they tell you I left things to Mason, they are lying. If they tell you I owed him anything, they are lying. You paid for this house more times than anyone will ever know. You paid for his school. You paid for my medicine. You paid for the roof and the taxes and the repairs and the groceries when money was tight and nobody wanted to say it out loud. I saw what they did. I did not stop it soon enough. I thought if I kept peace in the house, I could fix it later. I was wrong. Please wear your uniform when you come to the courthouse. Let them see the daughter they never bothered to understand. I had to stop reading and press the heel of my hand to my mouth because I thought I might cry right there in that office, in front of a man I barely knew. Dad had known. He had seen everything. And the worst part was that he had carried the shame of not stopping it. Not me. Him. I went back to the house that afternoon with a folder full of copies and a heart full of fire I had spent years learning how to bury. Mason was in the driveway when I got there, standing beside a shiny SUV he had rented to impress the wrong people. He saw the folder in my hand and immediately straightened. What did Harlan say? I looked at him. How much did you take? The color left his face. Tessa appeared on the porch behind him, her arms crossed. Mason? He turned on her like she had slapped him. "Shut up." I held the folder tighter. $82,000. Mason laughed once, too fast and too loud. "That's not your business." "On the contrary," I said. "It's my name on the loan." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't understand." "No," I said. "You really think I don't?" He ran a hand through his hair. Dad was dying. The house needed repairs. The business needed cash. I was going to pay it back. With what? With the sale. The sale you were trying to push through before the burial was over? He had no answer for that. Mom came to the doorway then, her face drained of color. "Emma, please don't do this here." "Do what?" I asked. "Tell the truth." She flinched. That told me almost as much as the paperwork had. I turned to her. "You knew." She said nothing. "You knew he forged my name." She swallowed hard. "It was temporary." I stared at her. "Temporary?" I repeated. "You hid this from me and sold my name for temporary?" "It was for the house," she said, voice trembling now. "For all of us." "No," I said. "It was for Mason." That made Mason explode. "Don't you dare act like you're the only one who sacrificed anything," he snapped. "You left. You chose the army over your family. I was here. I was the one taking care of Mom and Dad." I stepped toward him until we were nearly nose to nose. "You took care of them?" I asked quietly. "You stole from them." His jaw tightened. "You have no idea what it costs to keep a family alive when everybody expects you to do everything right." I looked at him for a long second. Then I said, "I know exactly what it costs. I paid for it." Tessa shifted behind him and said, in that cool, cruel little voice of hers, "Mason, maybe we should call someone." "Go ahead," I said. "Call them." She stared at me. I tapped the folder. "The bank already has the documents. Harlan already knows. And if you think this stops here, you're wrong." Mason's face changed then. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. He had thought I was coming home broken. Easy to push. Easy to guilt. Easy to fold. Instead, I had come home with proof. The next day, Harlan filed the papers to stop the sale. The bank put a freeze on the fraudulent loan. Mason's business account was flagged for investigation. By that evening, whispers had already spread through town. People talk in small towns. They always do. At first it was confusion, then disbelief, then the kind of careful silence that comes when people realize the person they thought was harmless has been standing on the other side of the room the entire time. Mason called me 5 times that night. I did not answer. On the 6th call, I picked up just to hear him breathe. "Emma," he said, and for the first time in my life, my brother sounded small. "We can fix this." "You should have said that before you forged my signature." "It wasn't like that." It was exactly like that. There was a pause. Then, quietly, "You're really going to destroy me?" I looked out the window at the dark yard, at the old maple tree, at the house my father had built a life around. "No," I said. "You did that yourself." He started talking faster after that, which meant he was panicking. "He made me do it," he said. "Dad was going to cut me off. I was just trying to keep everything together." "That's a lie." "No, Emma. Listen, Dad wrote me a letter." Silence. "I know he knew," I said. "I know you took the money. I know Mom hid it. I know you thought I'd come home and sign whatever you put in front of me because I always did what was easiest for everybody else. Still nothing." My voice got colder. "The only reason I didn't cut you out of my life years ago was because Dad kept asking me to be patient." Mason whispered my name. I almost felt sorry for him then. Almost. But sympathy is a strange thing. Once you've watched someone spend years treating your sacrifice like an obligation and your pain like an inconvenience, sympathy has a limit. "You want to know the part you really don't understand?" I said. "What?" "I wore this uniform because your father asked me to. I wore it because he finally saw me, not because I needed your approval." I hung up before he could answer. The courthouse hearing was scheduled for Friday morning. That was the day I wore my uniform one last time. By then, the story had become impossible to hide. Harlan had sent the proper notices. The bank had their own investigator. The county records were being reviewed. Mason had tried to make calls. But calls do not help when signatures do not match and money moves in paper trails that can be followed by people much smarter than greed. When I walked into the courtroom, my family thought I had come to argue about the house. That was only partly true. The judge entered, everyone stood, and after the formalities, Harlan rose to present the estate matter. He spoke calmly. He laid out the trust transfer. He submitted the loan application. He presented the bank's preliminary findings. Then he asked Mason if he wished to make a statement. Mason stood so fast his chair scraped loud enough to make heads turn. "This is insane," he said. "My sister is making all of this up because she's angry Dad didn't leave her more." He sat still. Harlan did not even blink. "Mr. Collins, would you like to explain why your fingerprint appears on the notarized copy of the loan authorization?" The room went quiet. Mason turned pale. The judge looked up. "Answer the question." Mason's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Tessa leaned toward him and whispered something that sounded like, "Say something." He swallowed hard. I was helping with paperwork." The judge's eyes sharpened. "Did your sister sign this?" "No." "Did you authorize use of her name?" He looked straight at me, and there it was again, that old entitlement. The belief that I would save him if he stared hard enough. I did not move. I was going to fix it," he said. Harlan's voice stayed polite. "By which point?" Mason did not answer. Then the investigator from the bank, a woman in a navy suit with a hard face and careful eyes, stepped forward and placed a second packet on the podium. "We've reviewed the transfer history," she said. "The funds were withdrawn in 3 segments over 6 months and moved through accounts tied to your business and personal expenses." Mason's face crumpled just a little. His wife suddenly looked at him as if she had just noticed, for the first time, that she had married a stranger. "That's not what you told me," Tessa hissed. He ignored her. The judge looked at him for a long moment, and then said, "Mr. Collins, I strongly suggest you tell the truth now." Mason's mouth trembled. And then, in the quietest voice I had ever heard from him, he said, "I panicked." That was it. No grand confession. No dramatic apology, just 2 words. I panicked. As if panic could explain away all the years he spent taking while I sent. As if panic could explain the signatures, the lies, the midnight calls to Mom, the way he had smiled at me in the kitchen after Dad's funeral while he tried to sell the roof over my head. The judge ordered a formal review of the fraud claim, referred the matter to the proper office, and suspended all sale activity until the records were resolved. Mason tried to speak again, but his voice cracked halfway through the first sentence. Mom started crying quietly in her seat. I did not look at her, not yet, because there was one more thing. Harlan stood once more and said, "Your Honor, there is a final statement included in the estate file." He opened a sealed envelope I had never seen before and unfolded a single page. "This letter was written by the late Roy Collins and signed in front of witnesses," he said. "It is addressed to the family." Then he began to read. Mason had always hated being read to unless it made him look good. This time, every word landed like a bell. "If you are hearing this, my family has finally been forced to sit still long enough to listen. Emma is the only one in this house who ever carried more than she was given. She left home as a child and came back as a woman with discipline I never had the wisdom to teach her. I watched her send money. I watched her carry guilt she did not deserve. I watched her be treated like she was useful only when needed and absent when not. That was my failure, too. I should have protected her better. I should have spoken sooner. To Mason, you were loved, but you were not entitled. To Linda, love is not loyalty if it hides the truth. To Emma, the house is yours because you built half of it with everything you gave up. And to all of you, she wore that uniform because she earned the right to stand taller than the people who underestimated her." The courtroom was silent when the letter ended. I realized then that my hands were shaking, not from fear, from release, because for years I had carried this strange, private shame, the one that comes from being the strong one, the one people call dramatic when you ask for fairness, the one they lean on and then accuse of making things heavy. My father's letter did something simple and impossible. It put the truth into the room. It gave my pain a name. Mason looked at me then, and for the first time since we were children, He looked like a person who had run out of excuses. He said hoarsely. Please. I did not answer right away. My mother stood then, her chair scraping hard against the floor. Emma, she said, and her voice broke on my name. Please. I looked at her. She had aged fast in the last year. The lines at the corners of her mouth were deeper. Her hands were thinner. She looked less like the woman who had dismissed me, and more like someone who had finally woken up in the middle of a storm. I didn't know how bad it was, she whispered. I almost laughed, but it would have been bitter, and bitterness was not what I wanted to take with me when I left that room. You knew enough, I said. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was trying to keep the peace. No, I said softly. You were trying to keep the lie comfortable. That hurt her. I saw it. I did not enjoy it, but it was true. Mom covered her mouth and nodded once. Because sometimes the first step toward redemption is admitting you failed in a room where everybody can hear it. Mason stepped down from his seat then, one slow step at a time, and looked at me like he had just understood that some bridges do not burn all at once. Some collapse because the people standing on them keep taking pieces until nothing is left. He spoke quietly. I'm sorry. I looked at him for a long moment. The part of me that used to beg for his approval, the part that wanted a brother who would stand up and say my name with respect, that part had gone very still. Sorry isn't payment, I said. He nodded like he expected that. It isn't repair, I said. He nodded again. It isn't enough to erase what you did. No, he whispered. I know. That was the first honest thing he had said to me in years, and somehow it made the room feel even heavier. I took one breath, then another, and when I spoke again, my voice was level. You're going to answer every question the investigator asks. You're going to sign everything. You're going to tell the truth to the bank. You're going to tell the truth to Mom. And if you want anything from me after this, it will be because you earned it, not because you demanded it. He looked down. The judge dismissed the hearing for the day, and people began to rise slowly, heads turning, whispers starting. The story already traveling through the courthouse hallway, before I had even reached the door. I stayed where I was for a second longer. My mother came toward me carefully, as if I were something fragile and armed at the same time. She stopped just in front of me and reached out, then hesitated. I let her decide. After a long moment, she touched my sleeve. This was your father's idea? She asked. Yes. Her eyes closed. He knew, she said, almost to herself. Yes. For the first time in my adult life, my mother looked ashamed in a way that was useful. Not the kind of shame that turns people defensive, the kind that finally cracks the wall and lets something better grow through. I'm sorry, she whispered. I believed her enough to let the words land. That doesn't mean they fixed everything. It just meant they were finally real. Outside, the wind had picked up, and the flag on the courthouse pole snapped once overhead like a clean salute. I stood there on the steps in my uniform, the one I had told myself I would never wear again, and looked out at the street where I had once been a girl trying too hard to earn a family's love by being useful. Down the block, I could see Mason leaving the building with Tessa. She was talking fast, furious now, gesturing with both hands while he stared at the pavement. I knew, even before the official findings came back, that the life he had built on lies was already falling apart. His business partners pulled out within 2 weeks. The bank seized the accounts. The investigation found more than one forged document. Tessa filed for separation before the month was over. Mom had to move into a smaller place for a while, and I did not rescue Mason from any of it. I did not soften the consequences. I did not hide the truth to keep the family comfortable. For the first time in my life, I let reality do what reality does. It teaches, and sometimes it teaches late, but hard. The house went into the trust exactly as Dad had written it. The sale never happened. After the legal work was finished, I made one decision that surprised even me. I kept the house for a while, but I did not keep it as some trophy of revenge. I repaired the roof. I cleaned out Dad's old workshop. I donated part of what was left after the debts were settled to a veterans support fund in his name. I gave Mom enough to find her footing, but not enough to let the old patterns continue. As for Mason, he spent a long time learning what it means to live without the cushion of other people's sacrifice. I did not stay close enough to watch every detail, and maybe that was mercy. Maybe that was maturity. Not every consequence has to be witnessed to be real. A few months later, I found the box of old things Dad had kept for me in the attic. There were school photos, ribbon pins, and a folded note with my name on it again. This one was short. "You were never too much," it said. "They were just too small to hold all of you." I sat on the attic floor and cried for a long time after that. Not because I was broken, because I was finally understood. That is the part people miss when they hear a story like mine. They think the hardest moment is the betrayal, or the court hearing, or the day the truth came out in public. But the hardest moment was actually quieter than that. It was standing on the courthouse steps in my dress uniform for the last time, and realizing I had spent years trying to prove I was worthy of a family that never bothered to learn what that word meant. I did not wear that uniform to impress them. I wore it because my father had finally seen me. I wore it because truth matters more when the people who ignored you are forced to look. I wore it because I was done shrinking to make them comfortable. And I wore it one last time because, after everything, I wanted my family to understand the simplest thing of all. I was never asking for special treatment. I was asking them to recognize the cost of what I had given. By the time they finally did, it was too late to undo the damage. But it was not too late for justice. And it was not too late for peace. As for me, I kept the uniform in a garment bag in the back of my closet after that day. I have not worn it again. I don't know that I ever will. But sometimes, when the evening light hits the hallway just right, I see the shadow of that jacket hanging there, and I remember the sound of my boots on the courthouse steps, and the look on my brother's face when he realized I had not come home to be silent. I came home to be heard. And for the first time in my life, my family finally listened.